Welcome to another demo. This one we're going to be doing a drawing in graphite of this reference here. You can see that I start out with a very broad lock-in of the overall shapes. I'm really trying to find specific proportional information, and the shape of the face here is the thing that I'm trying to nail as broadly as possible. You'll see that I do stay in this section for quite a long time because in terms of the likeness, it's actually in the shape of these proportions that it's really easy to recognize that this is this individual. I would say that this is actually the hardest part of this particular portrait, and I don't think I actually nail it by the end. I'm quite close, but there's a tilting down of the head that I haven't quite captured. Mine is just a little bit more straight on, and so that there's definitely something here that's a little bit tricky in terms of the proportion of the angling down of the face. When I'm doing those measurements, what I'm really checking is just how far is the top of the hair to the eye line compared to the eye line to the bottom of the chin. And so then I'm going to go ahead and put in a bit of a wash just so that I can have a light and dark comparison and have an easier time to compare light side with shadow side. I try to do this as quickly as possible because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this aspect of it, because then I get kind of precious about the shadow shapes, when in reality it's just trying to put in an even tone so that I have a light and shadow side comparison. After I go in with the main shape of the face, I'll start to place in just where I think the features are in terms of how far up or how far down they are in the shape of the head and how they sit in relation to one another. So I'm using angles you can see from like the edge of the nose to the corner of the eye and the eyebrow. And then I'm going to go ahead and take a kneaded eraser here and push the whole drawing back. So rather than trying to nail it in the first go, you'll see that my particular method of working is to do a few iterations in which I'm kind of building and refining slightly more each time. So I don't erase the drawing completely. I just give myself the opportunity to sort of be a little bit more fluid in those initial steps and put in an estimation of what I think that the portrait is going to be looking like, and then I kind of go in and erase it back, not all the way, and be a little bit more specific each time I do this. So you'll see that that's actually a pretty solid working method that I use. For reference, this entire drawing took me about 2 hours, 10 minutes-ish, somewhere along those lines, and so it is quite effective for getting a pretty detailed drawing in a quick amount of time. I wouldn't say it's been like very highly rendered, or I'm not being very specific about my edges or treating this as a finished drawing. It's more very specifically a block-in for a painting, and so I'm more focused on getting the things that I need, like plane changes and things like that, but it is a decent level of finish when I'm done. Now I'll go further and kind of put in, just circles where the irises will be and start to feel like, okay, this is a little bit further along the bridge of the nose and things like that. You'll see that I do continue to refine the shape of things. Like at this particular stage, I can see that the shape of the face is far too heart-shaped as opposed to cylindrical, and so that's definitely something that even now I'll go back and push back. This is me going over with a kneaded eraser. And so you'll see that the lines are still there, and now I'm gonna make sure that I'm checking angles of the face. I've seen a lot of artists who work on block-ins like to make all of these lines incredibly light, and that is a great working method. So you can see I do try and draw quite lightly at first, and then as I'm sure of where the placement of things will go, it will get darker and darker as I'm more confident in the placement of things. I happen to work sort of with a medium lightness and then erase it back. That just is the way that I'm more comfortable, as opposed to like angel soft light lines. I just like to be able to, as still on the light side, but really make a mark that I'm seeing. And so that's the need for the reason that I need to continuously push it back. It feels almost like I'm putting a layer of tracing paper or like a clear or semi-clear surface on top of the piece and just kind of pushing it visually back in space, lowering the entire opacity on the subject. Here I'll actually go in and sketch in the shape of the hair. That does make quite a difference. Not all of the individual curls, but just what the overall shape is, because we're using that as a negative, a light and a dark shape comparison. So the entire face being lighter and the hair being darker, that helps us to sort of be able to catch some of the likeness there in terms of recognizing shapes. This is the stage in the drawing where it's really easy to want to go in and put in a lot of detail in the features themselves, especially because I've roughed in a really gentle amount of information of where the features are and sort of what their overall shape will be. And so especially for things like eyes that are so communicative and important for a drawing like this, it's so easy to want to go in and put in that information too early. And so even I am very tempted, you can see, to go and put more information there. But it really is important to make sure that you're kind of looking at the drawing as a whole, because if I put in really beautifully rendered eyes right now, they wouldn't fit properly and sit in the face properly. And so it would be almost inefficient to do that, because I would then have to go and erase them out. And sometimes that can be really emotional to do, especially if you've like nailed one of the eyes or both of them with a lot of emotion. And so I definitely recommend to hold off as long as possible. That, for reference, this is like a solid hour's worth of work, probably, if I'm estimating here, just in this early stage. We might be more closer to like 40 minutes worth of work at this point, but still, it is quite a long time to stay in that early stage. And then I sort of allow myself, once I'm feeling more confident in the shape of the face. But I can even see now that it's like that right cheekbone. And I know that this like sort of was difficult for me for lots of the drawing, was the way that the cheeks were lining up, because there is a slight tilting away of the face. Not only is she tilting down, but slightly away from the viewer as well. And so that is something to really watch out for on top of that. I will say that it's a little strange, like my drawing is slightly turned away from the camera as well, and so the angle is a little bit, we're not looking at it straight on, but it is quite close, so that's also just a small caveat here. The pencil that I'm using, I can give some more information on that. It's called a Write in the Rain pencil, and it's just a really hard graphite. And I found that it does a lot of really beautiful things in terms of being able to make really even, laying flat tone, and it gets quite dark, which is really nice. But then also, it's good for making light lines in those initial sketching lines as well. I'm using the kneaded eraser to sort of carve out some of the shapes of the hair. And I really prefer to work with something that's much more fluid when I'm doing hair that's like curly or just like textured. I think that it can be really fun to use like a a powdered charcoal and a kneaded eraser and like a brush kind of thing. So I'm pushing this back again. Again, you can see I do leave a lot of the information that's there. It's really just a way for me to make sure that I'm not committing too early. I'm really making sure that everything is in its place. Here I'm checking the angles of the corner of the mouth and how that's relating to the eye. If you drop the plumb line, I'm seeing, do I have enough of the side of the face to show that there's a little bit of a turn of the head away from us? I'm making sure that the eyebrows and the eyes are following the same angle and matching up with where the bridge of the nose is. I'm just making sure that I'm going in and I'm double checking all of that information. And rather than just doing that by looking at it, I'm making sure that I'm going in and redrawing it actually. And so that's something that I just really enjoy in the process itself. It helps me to do these a lot more quickly than if I was sort of just stopping and staring at it to make sure that it looked okay, and then also stopping and continuing on with the drawing as though all of those things were automatically correct. But I like to really go into this assuming that I'm not quite there yet, because you can definitely see when it locks into place that you're there. And so as long as I'm still under the impression that it could improve, that is actually true, that generally I stop working on the drawing when I realize, like, actually this is like pretty solid. Sometimes you'll see, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, mine is a little bit more straight on. I didn't quite get the tilt of her head down and that slight degree of an angle change. But that was, you know, within reason that I would have to probably redraw quite a bit in order to make that happen. And so I was all right with that slight change from the reference, but you'll see that I did get a pretty decent likeness. And so I know that that's kind of, you know, where I was happy with it. And so mostly I just kind of continue to tinker with this until I'm there. And a lot of the times I try to stay earlier on in the process and then kind of go in and add the detail later. I know I've said that a couple of times this video, but it's just so tempting. And as a teacher, I've just seen it so many times that people go in with every intention of doing that and then they don't actually do that. And so I'm just, you know, being quite thorough in my statement of that, I suppose. This is also a really fun part of the drawing. This is something that I would call the ugly stage. I think that every piece of art in the world, no matter what medium you're using, has an ugly stage. And that's just that you're not in the early stages where it was sort of not formed yet, and you're not towards the end where it's clicked. You're somewhere in between, and it is so easy to walk away from a drawing in this stage, or a painting or a song or anything in this stage of the process. So you can see that I'm trying to verify exactly where the eyebrows are lining up and exactly where the eyes would be placed, and it just doesn't look finished. I've been working on it for about half of the, like I'm about halfway through the project right now. I haven't put the details in, and so it just feels like it could be, it is an emotionally difficult thing to continue to work on something that doesn't feel like it's coming together quite yet, but this is 100% the part of the process that you just need to trust and know that you have to get through this uncomfortable middle in order to be able to get to the other side. And what's fun for me is that I actually worked on this drawing over the course of 2 different days for about an hour each. And so I actually leave the drawing at about this stage and come back in the next day. And it was definitely like, I need to fix this. You know, it was definitely an emotional stubbornness that I was feeling like I really need to work on this, because I know that I can make this into something that's great. But, you know, the likeness was slightly off here and the features weren't quite coming together. There was something that I wasn't catching about the change in the angle of the right eye. And yes, so there was a few things wrong with the drawing, no matter how much caution I had taken against all of this in the beginning and really trying to be as accurate as possible. It takes a bit of fiddling for me to be able to catch a likeness. I'm always very impressed with artists that can catch it very quickly. You'll see that it does take me right until I'm close to the end to finally lock that into place. But yeah, keep going. That's my sort of sage advice while we're here in the middle. You can see that I start to put in some information in terms of the shapes of the eyes. And I know that I'm going to go in and erase that right eye after a bit, because it's really bringing the entire image forward by we call that frontalizing the school I've gone to. And it just means that I'm taking the tilt of her face that was slightly turned away from us and really making it so that she's looking really straight on. And I'm already doing that with the tilt up and down of the head. And so by doing it in this second way, it's really, it's just changing the reference quite a lot. And so that's also affecting the likeness. And so anyway, it's fun to watch these in retrospect. This is definitely not one of those tutorials where it's like a perfect drawing process and I don't make any mistakes at all ever. And I am just going to show you without any pauses or inconsistencies or incorrectness the process of drawing a perfect portrait, because I don't think that that's real art making, and maybe that is for the masters, but in my life there's definitely a lot of, we're going to try and do this as efficiently as possible. We will not succeed, but we will get as closer and closer each time that we attempt it. And so this is definitely an important part, is to understand that the mistakes are being made and be happy that you see that there are mistakes being made, because that's the first and most important step, in my opinion, is that you know that you've made a mistake, and then you sort of figure out, how can I go about fixing this? At this stage, I'm starting to put a darker wash down for the hair. I don't end up rendering the hair all the way. I do like a half render kind of situation, but this is definitely helping again with the shape of the face and figuring out exactly where my lines are, and that dark light comparison that happens when we are darkening the shadow of the hair. Also, I have to say big, huge thanks to our model for allowing us to use this image, and I'm very, very grateful for this image in particular, just because there was so much fun to not only do the drawing with this hair, but painting this hair was really a great bit of fun for me. This painting is part of my You Are Magic series. And so it's one of the pieces that I've completed as part of a series in which I was requesting images from people who had ever felt other or less than in any way. And I wanted to have the opportunity to show people how magical they are. And if they weren't able to see it, then I certainly could. And so I'm slowly working through those portraits. I think I've done about 15 maybe now, possibly 20. And I think I have about 20 or maybe even 40 more to go. So I really have a lot of work ahead of me in terms of these, but they're definitely such a lovely way to connect with people and to practice my skills and really feel a lot of intuitive feelings about the processes, because I don't do a lot of planning for them before the process. I just take the reference photo and start drawing, and then I'll do the transfer. And when I'm painting, it's a very alla prima painting process, and it's just really fun to see how they turn out, especially depending on how I know that person and what I know about that person. One of the things that I was finding was that I wanted to really make sure that the shape of the tank top was right. It's still not quite. I believe I go in and change it soon. That it's not quite matching up with the tilt of the body, and so that's something that we really want to make sure to capture. This is the next day, I believe. And so I'm coming in with fresh eyes, and I can really start to see where I need to make changes. And I really like working this way. If you have the opportunity to leave a drawing overnight or just even for an hour or so, and you come back and look at it, you can really see so many things that you couldn't see before, just based on the idea that it was something you were staring at for too long in the previous session. And so that some of those small changes sort of got away from you. I'm realizing that what I needed to do mostly was to pull out the left side of the portrait and make sure that there was enough room there visually that it wasn't getting too condensed in and then sort of squishing in the face too much. I think it's a common thing with portraiture that you can have features that have been really well painted. You can see I've erased out the eye there. That you can see features that are really well relating to one another, but they don't necessarily relate as well in the shape of the face itself. And so that's something that I think is happening right around here, that I need to pull the forehead up slightly so that there's just a little bit more room there visually, and really making sure that that outer cheek on the right side has enough room that it's matching symmetrically. It feels a little bit too condensed at the moment for this particular reference. I'm not doing a ton of rendering, but you can see I'm putting in just indications of where plane changes are. And so the sides of the cheek, specifically where that's rounding, the ball of the chin, I'm putting in that little indication of where that's turning as well. And things like that, like the forehead on the top, where that plane change is happening from the front plane of the head to the side plane of the head. I'm double checking my angles, because at this stage things have moved quite a bit from the beginning. Even if it's just tiny little movements, all of that sort of starts to add up. And so making sure that my eyes and my nose and my eyebrows and the corners of my mouth are all meeting the same line across the face. Yep, it's this eye in particular that was a little too low, I believe, in the face, and that was hurting it from looking like it was really turning slightly away from us. And that's by checking those angles that I could really see that that was the case, particularly on that side. And so, yeah, I'm checking angles constantly while I'm putting this eye in and making sure that from each of the features it will relate well. Right, yeah, and now it feels like it's sitting properly in the ball of the eye socket better. That's definitely something I think about when I'm doing the portrait, is that I'm thinking of that entire eye socket. And that can be really helpful, that you can see that I've put that line on the underside of the eye, and that's to indicate where the edge of the eye socket is. So I'm thinking about that in relation to the planes of the face as well. It's not just, I think the eye is here, it's how is the eye actually fitting into the skull underneath as well. putting in halftones again for the plane changes of the face on the side of the head to the front plane of the head. And then same thing with the mouth and all the halftones that I can see, just to give me an indication of where I'll be putting the paint for those specific plane changes. I have enough graphite down now that I'm able to erase out with my kneaded eraser and create some of the highlights that way. It is a white piece of paper that I'm drawing on, and so that's a nice way to build up some of the main tones of the values of the face and then erase out some of those highlights. Eyes are definitely my favorite thing to draw. As you can tell, I've put so much time into them already, but I do try and once I've got those in there, really make sure that the rest of the face feels like it's gotten enough attention as well, and that it's not just a drawing about eyes in solitude, but that they relate well to the rest of the anatomy. In terms of the order that you work on things, I think it's important to just try and work on the entire drawing gradually and not all focusing on just one area at a time. It's actually something that I'm doing now, and you'll see in a few seconds that I start to realize, oh, okay, well, the face is coming along quite well, but we have to really think about the other sections of the drawing. And so I start to divert my attention, but you can see that it's really tempting to just keep working on one section. I'm realizing that I need to pay more attention to the shape of the hair now that I'm closer in terms of the shape of the face, and that's going to help with this overall head and neck proportional issue, that if the hair doesn't feel like it's full enough or in the right shape, then that indicates that the skull isn't necessarily matching with where the shape of the face is. And so this is an important thing that you don't want to necessarily rush through, that particularly on this left side, I didn't have quite enough volume. It was a little bit too short or thin in terms of the amount of hair there was in comparison to the face. And that would just imply that the skull wasn't wide enough. And so the face would have looked out of proportion in comparison to the overall head. And so you really want to see, especially with curly hair, you don't have to be exact with any hair really at all. You don't have to be exact, but you definitely want to have that general shape match up, and that will help with the overall likeness, because there's a reason that any person's hair in general, falls in any particular way or grows in any particular way. It's very specific to the shape of their skull and their anatomy, and so totally deviating from that can make it feel like it's a different person in some ways. And I'm just having fun now with placing in some specific curls and things like that. I'm trying to make sure that I get it to be long enough, and there's like a couple of shapes that I'm really seeing that have caught my attention, and so I'm definitely putting some of those in with more detail than with others. There's some really beautiful swoops that are happening, and so those caught my attention. But I'll generally work back and forth by additive and reductive methods, by just adding the graphite and then erasing out with the kneaded eraser for the curl patterns and things like that. So you'll see that I'll erase out quite a bit, and then I'll go back in and re-add graphite to those areas, but this is just helping to create some of the waves in the texture. from here I'm nearly done with the portrait. I'm going to add a tiny bit more in terms of the halftones and adding detail, and I'll triple check the way that the tank top is hanging and the proportions of the face and things like that. But this is definitely getting close to even being a rendered finished drawing as opposed to doing just a block in. So I'm absolutely playing at this point in the drawing process. If you're going to be using this for a painting, you don't necessarily need to go into all of that detail in the hair, for example, that I've put in, and all of the like subtle halftones that I put in the face. You could definitely just do a lot more line work for this, but I was enjoying it, and so I was just continuing to go on there. You can see that I actually go in here and start to add some freckles in because that's how much fun I'm having. And so I do end up keeping this drawing after I'm done with the portrait, but for a lot of block-ins, I don't go this much into detail, and that's totally up to you, depending on what your purpose of your drawing is for, if it's functional or if it's fun. Or if it's both, like what this is. This is me just like finding areas where I can be more subtle and add small bits more of information. Definitely, I think it's really easy to be incredibly pronounced about things that are meant to be quite subtle in drawings and in paintings, and there's something that's really beautiful about being able to notice a plane change or a slight value change or a slight color change without being loud about it, because I think that that's an instinct that we have, that when we see it, we want everybody else to know it's there as well. But oftentimes in real life, things are much more subtle than that. And so So this is the final drawing, and I'm really very happy with how it turned out. It is a little bit off from the reference, but I think it does carry a lot of emotion, and it does have a good likeness. And so thank you all so much for watching. You can see more of my work at tiffanyday.com. Really appreciate it.